wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. And so Paul obviously is encouraging them, right? You can see he's like, finally, this is the last instruction. Be strong in the Lord. And he's telling them to put on this armor of God. And he's warning them about how serious this battle is, right? He kind of lists off all these things: rulers, authorities, cosmic powers of darkness, right? Spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. He's trying to tell them how serious this battle is, right? How much they really need God. And the reason why it's actually titled this sermon, The Greatest Fight of Your Life. This is what Paul is trying to get them to understand. You are about to go into the greatest fight of your life. In order to survive it, to win, to live, you need the best armor, and the best armor is God. And so for the most part, right, he's talking to an audience that knows a lot about armor, especially whether these people were Roman citizens, whether they were Roman slaves. The Roman army is considered one of the best of all time, right? How they fought, all the stuff that they used, their tactics, things like that, some of their generals. So that this audience would know what he's telling them, right? How this connects to it. And really, like, how the armor is meant to protect them. And so they would know that. And so he's trying to now bring a spiritual aspect to it. And so for us, you know, it's the same thing, right? In many ways, war has never changed. Armor has never changed, and battles have never changed, right? The same things are always still going on. And so this is where, you know, this instruction is pretty, this verse is pretty easy because it has a lot of direct correlation to us, right? Even for myself, I got to calm down because this armor stuff gets me all excited. But basically, you know, you guys know I've served in the Army 10 years, right? I went to Iraq, Afghanistan. I've worn armor. I'm no stranger to it. I know all about how to train for it, right? This is very personal because even some of these verses, this is how I became a pastor, basically preparing for spiritual battle. So let me have a little joke so I can calm down. All right, so this is my favorite T-shirt right here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it says Winnie the Pooh, right? You know the guns that go pew pew pew, right? So this is him, Winnie the Pooh, right? This is my favorite T-shirt. This encapsulates me pretty well. You guys know me now as Big Bear, but before I was this bear. All right. But when we talk about armor, you know, you have to understand there's such a seriousness to it, right? You cannot just put on armor. You cannot wake up and be like, you know what, I want to wear armor today. I'm going to put it on. I'm going to be able to go fight and be ready to battle, right? It doesn't work that way. Your body cannot handle it, right? There's so much weight to it, so many things. Like you might be able just to withstand and put it on for a little bit, but you'll never be able to go against somebody in battle with it, right? So for us, right, the Army, we have to learn about armor. We have to learn how to wear it. It's funny when you get your body armor issued to you, right? They give you all these different parts. You have all these pieces. You get a bunch of plates, right? You get front plate, back plate, you get side plates, stuff like that. So they give you all this gear and they tell you, all right, take it home, put it together, try it on, inspect it, make sure every single thing works, right? Make sure every snap, everything's like 100% quality. If not, you know, you can change it, right? But you need the best armor. You need to make sure everything works. So when you put it all together, right, you got to put it on and see how it fits. So the funniest thing about soldiers putting on armor, I don't know why this happens, but every one of us puts it on with no T-shirt on. Right? I don't know what it is, but we just like, you know, I'm gonna put it on with no T-shirt, right? So when you put this armor on, right, you start looking in the mirror and you're like, start flexing, like, ah, right? Like, man, I look tough. Like, man, I'm bad, right? You're like, yes, right? You start doing poses in it. You're like, right? Like, let me see, right? You're just doing this, right? Having fun, right? You're like, nothing could touch me. I'm so invincible, right? Like, I'm a badass, right? Like, yes, like I'm gonna tear it up, right? And so as you're doing this for about an hour, all of a sudden you're like, oh, like my shoulders hurt, right? Like my back is hurting, right? And you're just like, even my legs. Like they're getting like they're sore, right? You're like, why are my legs so sore? I've just been literally goofing around posing, right? And you're like, what the heck? And you realize just be wearing it for an hour for fun, your body's already worn out, right? You're like, dang, I'm already worn out just from holding it for an hour in a cool AC room, right? Your dorm rooms, apartments, it's all nice weather. You're like, I'm about to go wear this in 120, 130 degrees. I can't even do it for an hour in the best conditions, right? Not only can you not wear it for fun, imagine when you got to go wear it in battle. You got to go charge up hills. You got to go run, do all this other stuff, right? You still got even more weight because you got your backpack sometimes. You got the ammo. You got your weapon, all this other stuff. right? So then in that moment, after that hour of having fun, you're like, dang, I need to dedicate my life to preparing to wear this for real. I need to dedicate my life, every single thing, to make sure I can wear this well and wear it to win, right? And so all of a sudden, we come up with this great plan. We have a plan, a training plan for the next 6 months, 9 months, right? Depending on how often we're going. It's like I need to wear it all the time as much as possible. When I go get groceries, I'm wearing armor. When I pump my gas, I'm wearing armor. When I work out in the morning, I'm wearing armor. When I play sports, I'm wearing armor. All the time, all you do is wear it as much as possible, right? You start eating right. You start eating healthier, all these different things. You got to make sure you rest because you can't, when you go to war, you have to wear it a lot more than naturally possible. So you try to make sure you rest ahead of time in those 6 months, right? So you're doing this crazy balance and they have great plans to do it. But that's where it said, like, for us to wear armor, it is a life thing. It's all about our life to do that. Does that make sense? And I'll explain that a little bit more of how that works. But this is where Paul is trying to tell them the same thing. When he's telling them, put on the armor of God, he's basically telling them, put your life together so that you are able to wear this and protect yourself from all the things that are coming. And so for Paul, this is not the first time that armor is mentioned in the Bible, right? He's actually quoting a lot of Isaiah, where there's a lot of mentioning of how God puts on his armor, does all these things, right? In Isaiah, there's a lot of prophecies of Jesus coming, all these different, how God's going to achieve all these victories and stuff like that. And so this is where he's trying to remind them, this has always been the warning. You've been warned to get ready to wear this stuff. You guys have not been ready. You guys haven't been getting ready. So now you need to do it now, right? Break free of this stuff. And so even in this book of Ephesians, right, he has a very unique pattern where he's constantly repeating and constantly using parallels to kind of use this same thing of what they need to do to be able to be protected by God. And so this command of put on the armor of God, he said this in 4:24 as well. Put on the new self, created to be like God in true holiness and righteousness. The armor of God can be understood as the armor that God provides, the armor that God himself wears, or even the armor that is God himself. So you see this same terminology, right? Put on armor, put on the new self. So Paul is kind of using this over and over. You're a new creation, you're a new being. You need to put on this new stuff, right? So the new self was to be like God, but this is where that armor, right? This Isaiah correlation was like, God wears this armor. Who God is his armor, right? There's all this kind of connection where he's telling them, if you live the way God tells you to, you will be protected one way or another, right? And so as he's saying that, this is where God has always said that throughout the Old Testament. God has always talked about him protecting his people. And many ways that God always told them was like, just do what I say, follow my ways, and you'll be safe. Follow my ways, you'll be protected. Follow my ways, and those outsiders won't attack you, right? But if you start doing things on your own or start doing this other stuff, you're going to get attacked. You're going to get all this other stuff. People are going to want to take you. If you're a threat to them, then all of a sudden they're going to go after you, right? So God tried to give them as much warnings as possible of how to avoid these fights, right? He's like, just trust in me, trust in my protection, go where I send you, and you'll be good. And there's a lot of characters, a lot of times when they did very well and did that, right? And they lived through that protection of God. But there were so many times where after a while they stopped focusing on it, or they thought they could just do whatever they wanted. They didn't need to keep preparing to wear that armor or use God's armor, and then they got in trouble, right? And God had to rescue them, but it came at a price, right? So, but this is where it's always about God saying, I want to protect my people. And so he's like, this is how I can protect you. So in the Old Testament, Isaiah, the armor language suggests it is the armor that God wears. Some of the armor, truth, righteousness, salvation, suggests we are to put on God, or at least the characteristics of God. The idea is therefore close to 5:1 in Ephesians 5:1. Be imitators of God. Only by taking the characteristics God reveals can we be strong. And so that's where, like I said, he's constantly parallel. Put on the new self. What is the new self? An imitator of God. How does that help you? It's armor that will protect you across the board. It'll protect your holiness, righteousness, and your salvation, right? Because I don't want, I won't get into too much on how the pieces work, right? Because you got to learn how to wear armor first before you know how to use it. But this is where the whole theme is always about that. Protecting your heart, protecting your mind, protecting your spirit, right? Being able to make sure you can stand firm and resist all these things. And so that's why Paul keeps using these themes, right? God resists all these things. God has the characteristics to not ever be tempted this way. God is always vigilant to not go down these paths. If you do that, you can have the similar protection. And not only that, he'll be there with you to do it. And so, because even for the most part, I don't know if, no matter how much you train for armor, you'll always tire out. Nobody can wear armor 24/7, 365. Right? Your body will give up. Your body will break down. You always need to take it off at some point. Right? No matter how good it is or no matter what it is, right? Even tanks, vehicles, you can have all that protection. That vehicle still needs maintenance, all these different things, right? Your armor cannot go 24/7, 365. And the enemy knows that. So for the most part, the reason why we train to wear our armor and wear it well is when the enemy's constantly watching us, they're looking for who they're going to attack, right? Who is the softest target? Who is the person that we can kill and possibly live and survive? Right? So if you've trained to be able to work 10, 12, 20 hours, right? And you're just like, I can stand around. You have like a good body, and you're just always ready. They're going to be like, I don't know that person. Right? If they look down the road, they see another soldier, like, oh, this hurts, right? Like, oh, my. And they look weak, and they look like they're not. The enemy knows they're going to take their armor off very soon. They're going to need a break very soon. Does that make sense? That's what they say. Like, in many ways, armor can only work for so long. So there's strategies that we use to protect ourselves. But this is where you have to understand that no matter what armor you put up, whether it's God, whatever thinking that you can think to protect yourself, at some point it's always going to wear out. At some point it's always limited to who you are and how much you can go. But at some point you're always going to need a break, and then you're going to be vulnerable. Right? So this is what Paul's telling them. Like, don't you realize that all right, we're good. God is going to give you an armor that about that a little bit later, but this is where he's trying to help them understand, and this is what we need to understand, that the armor, right, we need an armor that will protect us all the time, and that's what God offers. And so the reason why we need this armor is basically we're fighting the greatest fight of our life. And so for me, this is what I feel who the greatest enemy is, right? The second point says, the greatest enemy you will ever face is yourself. Who can hurt you the most? You or other people? What do you think? Who thinks other people can hurt them the most? Who thinks themselves, right? All the negative thoughts that you have, all the times you put yourself down. Right? A lot of us, we keep a lot of stuff secret, a lot of emotions that nobody knows about, right? Or stuff we're ashamed of. Nobody knows to say it, to make fun of us about it, right? But when we're going through challenges on our heads or things like that, our mind will repeat every single weakness that we have. Our mind will tell us how we're not good enough. Our mind will tell us how we can't do it. Does that make sense? Our mind is what creates the fears, our greatest fears. Would you guys agree? Right? That's where I said, like, even as soldiers, our greatest enemy is ourselves. When we're weak, we stop wearing our armor. When I have soldiers, you're not supposed to drink, right? When you go overseas, you're supposed to be clear-minded, all this other stuff. Some soldiers can't handle the stuff, or there's all these struggles inside of them. They start drinking, do drugs, things like that. They end up getting killed. Does that make sense? We say something called complacency kills. I had one friend, he died because he was so tired and it was so hot. He's like, I'm just going to put the AC down, right? I'm going to put my window down because it's hot. And the roadside bomb went off and shot the shrapnel right through his head. Right? He killed it. That's where we were like, what the heck? He died himself. The armor would have protected him, but he had that lack of self-control. Does that make sense? That's why, like soldiers, we understand that. Like, the enemy has very little influence on what we do. There's some times where, yeah, it's just our time to go. But for the most part, if we do everything right, if we train the right way, the odds are in our favor. Does that make sense? We're the ones that are the liability. And so this is where God's kind of, for us, we should understand that as well. The greatest hurt that's usually caused to us is ourselves. Right? The times when we really make mistakes or do things that we don't want to do, that's where we've hurt ourselves the most. Right? And so this is where Paul kind of writes this. He says, the schemes of the devil, spiritual forces in heavenly places. This is why what I'm saying is inside of you. Because when you read that, right, how is there spiritual forces in heavenly places? Most of us, when we think about heaven, we're like, that's free of sin, free of evil. Right? This is the place where God is, his strongest. Right? That's where evil's gone. That's heaven. So how can spiritual forces have power in heavenly places? Where's the one place heaven is vulnerable? Inside of us. We're the temple of God. He's in our hearts. Right? We get a foretaste of the glory that's to come. We get a little bit of taste of heaven inside of us with the Spirit living with us, right? That's the only heavenly place that is vulnerable. That's where we get attacked. That's where the devil can try to break it down. Does that make sense? That's what Paul's saying. Like, don't you realize inside you, this battle, that's the greatest battle. If you know the armor, he talks about helmets, chest plates, right? The chest plates to protect your heart. Make sure your heart's for God. Protect your mind, that nothing can change your mind away from God. His way of thinking. Does that make sense? The armor literally protects what's inside, right? You don't put armor to protect, that's something else. Those are walls. Does that make sense? That's fortresses. Those are castles, things like that. That's what those protect. Large territories, things away from you. Armor is merely to protect your inner sides. Does that make sense? That's what you got to say. When he's talking about this, the armor that he chose to use is all armor that protects you, your insides. That's why he talks about even the struggle. It's actually a word for like wrestling, right? Close combat, something really close to you. He'll talk about a sword later. The sword they're talking about is a very little tiny sword, which is for close combat. When the enemy's so close and you can't pull out a big sword and hit him, you just pull that little dagger, ta-ta, right? Put him right in the ribs, twist it, or in the thigh, twist it, right? We talk about this, right? But that's what he's talking about. He's talking about this close personal battle. There's nothing more close and personal than inside you. Paul uses spiritual warfare in a lot of his books, and pretty much that's what his themes are, this battle inside of you. And so we'll look at a lot of the writings that he wrote. Romans 7:20, right? There's this section where Paul keeps saying, like, I will do all these things. I want to live this way. I want to do these right things, but all of a sudden I can't. In Romans 7:20, it says, now if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. Right? He's literally saying, I don't want to do this, but somehow there's a power inside me that is making me do it. Right? He's saying sin is making me do it. And so there's a little bit, I took this from this book called Wild at Heart, but basically it says, did you notice the distinction he makes? Paul says, hey, I know I struggle with sin, but I also know that my sin is not me. This is not my true heart. You are not your sin. Sin is no longer the truest thing about the person who has come into union with Jesus. Your heart is good. In the core of your being, you are good. Yes, there is a war within us, but it is a civil war. The battle is not between us and God. No, there is a traitor within who wars against our true heart, fighting alongside the Spirit of God. Right? That's what Paul is trying to tell him. I want to do this right thing. This is who I want to be. This is who I've given my life to be. I want to be like Christ. I want to make all these choices. And yet somehow I can't do it. Right? That's why he's saying the war inside me is so strong. We know Paul is a very strong character, right? Such faith, such boldness, such all these things. And he's literally telling them, I faced down death. I faced down all these different things. I'm able to overcome all this stuff. But yet inside me, there's a war that I'm losing. There's a war that I can't win. That chapter is really good because Paul is telling you like really how big this struggle is. It actually ends, it's kind of funny the way it ends because he basically says, right, I can't do what I want to. I can't do what's right. He's like, it's like, woe is me. Like, it's so miserable that I can't be free from this. So he ends like, he's ending with this kind of dark, like, oh man, I'm done. And then he says, thank God for Jesus. He's the reason why I have hope. He's the reason why this will go away. He's the reason why I'll win this battle. Right? So he tells how we are, and then he obviously then puts it onto Jesus. Right? That's going to be the strategy of how to win this war. But you have to understand and realize why he's saying this. There's a battle within. And that is going to be the strongest battle that you ever face. And that's why even the 2 Corinthians, right? It says, for though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. Here he's saying, once again, right, these thoughts, these things these are what's waging war. He talks about these strongholds, right? I don't know if you guys have ever studied strongholds, but that's what they talk about. There's certain things in your heart, certain things where you're blocking God, you're blocking the knowledge that he's given. You're blocking certain things where you're not free to let God's love flow through you. You're not free to receive God's grace because there's some kind of mental block, some kind of heart block that's preventing God's own power from giving you the healing that you're praying for. Does that make sense? There's a lot of like family, things that were passed down from family, generational sin, things like that. There's times where, like I said, you might feel that because you sinned so much before you came to Christ, that you can never be used by God, right? So every time God is calling you in your life, You're like, okay, I hear this call. It's pretty clear, but I know I can't do it. I know I'm not good enough to do it. Right? So all of a sudden you turn down God over and over again because there's a stronghold in your heart that's saying you are not forgiven. And that's where it's like, that's not what God's ever said. Does that make sense? Every sinner that goes to Christ is forgiven across the board. Every sin is washed away, right? That's why there's the weapon that we'll use next week talks about how the word of God is what cuts that apart. And that's where it's like the word of God says you are worthy, that you've been made all along to have a good heart, that this is not you. This is that sin that's corrupting you. Does that make sense? But God's cutting it out. He's going to get rid of it. If you give it up to him, let him destroy that stronghold, you're good. Does that make sense? And so that's where we're saying, like, this is where Paul is trying to tell him there's so many things internally that are stopping you from seeing God the right way. There's so many things that are preventing you from walking the way God wants you to walk. Right? And so this is where he's trying to tell him, understand this battle, take it to Christ, and that's how you're going to win it. Right? And so, but that's where he says we destroy every argument to make sure every thought is captive to Christ. That's why I said the helmet of salvation is meant to help protect your thoughts, right? But that's what we're seeing. Like, there's so many thoughts that are not under Christ. There's so many things that we think, and that's where it always, like, you got to put it under Christ. You got to fight in a way to make sure that you're following Christ's direction, right? Putting on his armor to do this. So we see Paul, obviously there's a lot of stuff in the other books, but even Peter himself uses similar ideology, right? So this is in 1 Peter chapter 5. It says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be the dominion forever and ever. Amen. Here we see this same kind of connection, right? Humble yourselves, put yourselves under Christ, and that way take all your anxieties to Christ. All those thoughts, all those things that make you nervous, all those things, right? All those anxieties about life, if you take them under Christ. If you don't, there's a devil roaring around getting ready to play on all your anxieties. See how that works? Right? He's literally telling them your anxieties. He knows everything you're thinking. He knows what your weaknesses are. He knows what pressure points to hit to make sure you get stuck in your fears. That you don't progress. You don't do what you're supposed to do. He's literally watching you and knows you that well. Does that make sense? That's why I said, like, that whole who knows you the best, what makes you really stuck is all those anxieties that just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Does that make sense? So this is where Peter's writing the same thing. These thoughts in your head, these anxieties that come up, creep up over and over, they're going to be the opening that the devil uses to take you down and go through your armor. Does that make sense? Because every armor has certain vulnerability points. That's where he's like, your anxieties are a vulnerability point that he can attack and just keep working. And in some way, he's going to work it more than God can help because you're not taking it to him. Right? And so that's where this is where you have to understand there's this battle. And it's being used, and your every single thought is being used against you. But it's important to understand, even in Paul, as he's saying, if you submit to Christ, humble yourselves to him, he will restore you. Right? So that's what he said. There's areas of your life that sin is corrupted, all these different things that's happened. Right? Once you've taken him in, he's going to be helping you restore that. I mean, he's going to restore your heart, restore your mind, restore all these things. Right? He's the one that's supposed to do that. He's going to confirm to you who you are, why he called you, all these different things. Right? His confirmation of I can do this. He says I can do that. I can do all these things through him. Nothing's impossible because he's asking me to do it. So that's where that confirmation gives you the strength. But more importantly, then he strengthens you. Right? So even he helps you with the calling, the confirmation, and then he literally gives you the strength to do it. Right? So that's why it's like, if you take your anxieties to him, you're like, I'm just going to lean on your strength. I can do it. And that's where he says he'll establish you. As you continue to lean on him, as you continue to fight with him, you will then be established and be side by side with him. Right? And then that's how victory is won. Right? So that's what these guys, they're all talking about this. It's inside you, these battles that start for everything and how you got to take it to Christ. And so it's this important understanding of you have to give all you can to win this battle. This is the greatest battle of your life. It takes absolute dedication. And so for me, I'll share before we move on to the next point, right? What does that look like? Right? I've shared a lot of crazy stories about all the stuff I've done in the Army. I had to try to figure out which one to use today. But basically, it was like, what did it take for me to be able to do all the crazy things that I did? right? And so for the most part, I knew as a baby, God saved me as a baby. At 5 years old, he told me I was going to be a soldier, right? For my whole childhood, I started preparing to be in the Army. And then I went to Iraq, Afghanistan, right? Did all those things. And so, but I've been training for armor and body armor at a very young age. How old do you guys think I was when I started training? Any guesses? What age or grade? 8th grade? Preschool? I didn't get to do the wolf training that I wanted to do. My dad wouldn't do wolf training as a baby, but I'll do for my kid. I started training for body armor when I was in 6th grade. When when you go to middle school, you got to get new backpacks, right? And so most of the time, my mom always took us shopping 95% of the time. My dad took me every now and then, but every time he took me shopping, it was to the military surplus store, right? So when you go to middle school, you're supposed to get that cool JanSport backpack, right? Like everybody has, right? You don't have no kid backpack no more with stuff. And so I was like, oh, all my siblings got that JanSport, right? I'm supposed to be getting it. I think that's the name of it, right? Okay. All right. And so as I'm going to get this backpack, my dad took me to the military surplus store, right? And he's like, that JanSport backpack sucks, right? Like that thing is so weak, like it can't carry any weight. Like it's so, it just looks good. You don't need that, right? So my dad, he'd always take me to the surplus to get like all the army pants that don't rip, boots, stuff like that, right? He'd take me to get jackets where like, this jacket will actually help you in all the weather conditions. It's like, you don't need a fashionable jacket, right? And so part of why I don't have a fashion sense is because my dad ruined it. But basically, right, he's telling me, like, you don't need this JanSport. He's like, you know what the Army backpack's like? You know what how much armor you have to wear? Like, all the weight? He's like, you need to start now. Right? He's like, look at this Army backpack. So he pulls out the Army backpack, and the back of it actually has a full-on metal frame. Does that make sense? It's a metal frame, like the whole cross. It has a special pad to hold on. Because it can carry up to 70 pounds, right, or more. It's supposed to only carry 70. They make you sometimes carry 100. But basically, it has this huge metal frame on the back, and then it's made out of this really strong, thick material. That makes sense? So it won't rip when you put a lot of weight into it. And so my dad's like, this is the kind of backpack that you need. Right? So at 6th grade, I was like, all right, Dad, like if you say I need it, I'll take it, right? I shouldn't have trusted him because I was going to get picked on for this backpack later. But it actually helped me down the road, right? So when my dad, I get this Army backpack, right? And so he's like, yeah, you got to put as much weight as possible and build up to be able to do it as you get older. And so at the time, my dad didn't want me to put his books in my backpack. Right? He didn't want me to ruin them, getting them all sweaty and getting squeezed in that backpack. So I actually went to the public library and started checking out a lot of books. And so I love to read, so I'd read the book, and then basically after I read it, I'd put it in the backpack, right? So I ended up putting like 120 books into my backpack, right? So I ended up having like all these late fees from the library. So after about a year, I could no longer go to the public library because I had like $300 worth of fines. But I just kept all these books to build up my strength. Does that make sense? So at that age, I started training to be able to wear body armor as an adult. Every sport I played, I had a training regiment that wasn't to be the best athlete. It was to use that sport to make me stronger for the Army. Does that make sense? I had that resolution in my mind. Like, I'm not going to lift weights. I'm not going to do this like everybody else. I need to make sure I have this kind of conditioning, this kind of strength. Does that make sense? So I did all these things. I have all these great stories where I was able to perform at very high levels. I was part of all these elite units, right? And that was the reason why. Because God gave me that instruction. I understood this thing where it's like, in order to wear it, you got to spend your whole life doing it. Does that make sense? And so as I wore that armor, I was training for what I thought would be the greatest battle of my life, right? Going to war, if the physical war is considered, for us, right, regular people, not Christians, is the greatest battle you'll ever face. And so I remember training with this armor, practicing, learning how God protected me, doing all this other stuff. I had to put it to the test in the real situation, right? How much would I really learn to trust God's armor and do all the things that He needed me to do? One of the better stories that I have is that when after about 6 months, where I did a lot of crazy stuff, I had this good reputation of what I could do. After a couple guys got killed, the one guy said I got killed through the window, another guy got killed. They're like, we're short on our team, this convoy team that drives the people around, escorts them, right? It's very dangerous, a lot of bombs, a lot of gunfire, things like that. And so they're like, who can replace these? Because it's hard to replace somebody after they die, right? Because everybody's afraid. And they're like, who do you think is going to be a good fit to join this team that can actually handle this kind of pressure? So I was the first person that they thought of. They're like, well, we think Chavez, right? I was Sergeant Chavez at the time. So they're like, Chavez can do it. Like, he's proven that he's pretty good. Let's see if he can do it. So when I joined this team, they're like, you got a great reputation, but we'll see how you respond when it's the toughest situation, right? Like, now it's a whole nother level. Let's see what you can do. And so as they're telling me, like, everybody says they're tough, but until the bullets fly, you don't really know what they're going to do, right? And so they're like, yeah, and so they end up putting me in the very last truck of this. You have like 6 vehicles, right? They each have significant roles. The 6th truck is one of the most dangerous ones because basically when they attack all the vehicles, your job is to drift back and draw all the fire. That way everybody else can get away. Does that make sense? And so, and then you try to escape, right? Like it's better odds by yourself. And so they put me in the last truck to test me, right? They're like, we're going to see what happens when you start getting shot at. And I was like, you know what? I was like, not only am I going to be able to handle it, I was like, but I'm going to be able to just park the truck, right? Because they're like, you need to be able to slow down to get everybody away. Like, we'll see if you're able to slow down or you're afraid and just drive off. I was like, not only will I not be afraid to slow down, I was like, I'll stop the truck as soon as we get shot at. And I won't move until you tell me to move. Till you guys are afraid and can't move and need to move. And they're like, we'll see, right? Like, that's big talk. So thankfully, the first day that I drove out with this team, we actually got ambushed, right? And so as we're driving down the road, all of a sudden, right, we get these people pop up and they're just getting all this gunfire from the left side, right? So as they're shooting at us, right, and I just stepped on the brakes, right? And so as we're getting shot at, all of a sudden, all these bullets are hitting our thing, ding, 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 right? So the gunner drops down like, oh, crap, dude, like, you know, because he's lost his protection. He's like, dude, what are you doing, right? Like, what the heck are you doing? Like, why are you stopping? And so I was like, what? I told you guys, I'm going to stop, right? And so the other guy in the truck, he's like, man, what are you doing? Like, we're sitting ducks, right? Like, we're going to get destroyed out here. And so as I'm sitting there, right, they're here and I'm getting shot at. I'm like, dude, calm down. I was like, I literally told you guys this was happening, right? Like, why are you so surprised? And so as I'm talking to them in this calm tone, all these bullets are hitting right next to me, right? There's windows right next to me. And so all these sparks are flying around, all this stuff. It's just ding, 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 ding. And I'm like, just be calm, be calm. And so they're like, what the heck, right? Like, dude, they're like, all right. Like, you proved it. You're not gonna panic, right? Like, let's get out of here. And so I'm like, all right, this is what we're gonna do. When I count to 3, I want you to pop up, start shooting at the 10 o'clock position, right? And I was like, and then that's what. And so he was like, all right. So I was like, 1, 2, bam, pop the truck, right? So I just take off. And so as the bullets are hitting us, once I stepped on it, now all of a sudden the bullets are behind us. That makes sense. Like, I was able to accelerate very fast. And so as we went away, then I'm like, 3, dude pops up, pop, 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 right? Just starts blasting them, right? So we take out the enemy, right? All of a sudden it was like, wah! We're just celebrating like, yes. Right? Because so as we're kind of like, yes, like that was a great strategy. We knew what to do, how to get out, right? Like I had the whole thing in my mind, right? And so as we did this, we ended up coming back to the base, right? And everybody's like, what happened? What happened? Like, dude, we saw your guys' truck stop. Like, we thought we don't have to circle back, all this other stuff, right? Like, all these things were running through their heads. Like, well, how did Chavez do? How did Chavez do? And they're like, this dude's freaking crazy. Like, Chavez is freaking crazy. Like, this dude just literally parked the truck, right? Like, he wasn't joking. He literally parked the truck and the whole time we're getting shot at, he's just carrying on a normal conversation with us. Like, nothing's happening, right? And they're like, what the heck? Like, so they're all shocked. Like, what's going on? And they're like, not only was he calm, but he was able to come up with a very good plan to make sure we got out of there without any danger, right? Like, he just was like precise thinking. Hey, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to move. This is what position you need to shoot, all in a matter of seconds, right? And so that's when they're asking, like, Chavez, like, how the heck did you do that? And I was like, man, I've been born for this. I've been training my whole life for this. I was like, I know what to do. I was like, when we're getting shot, I was like, we have some of the best armor in the U.S. Army, right? So we got the best armored truck. I got body armor inside. And more importantly, I got God's armor that protects me my whole life, right? So I was telling him, I was like, you think it's the first time I've been shot at? I was like, y'all don't know what it's like in the hood. Right? But I was like, you know how many people would try to kill me my whole life before I even joined the Army? And God always protected me. All the things that I was already doing in the Army to prepare for this, God protected me, right? Whatever he asked me to do, I would do, no matter how dangerous, I would do it, right? All the 6 months I was in the most dangerous city in the most dangerous year of Iraq. I was like, I did that for 6 months doing all these things, and every single time God protected me. Every single chance everything that he asked me to do, I would do, and I knew his armor was good enough, that it was the best. Does that make sense? So I was like, to sit there in this moment, that enemy can't penetrate my armor. So I can literally sit there with bullets flying around because I know how good God's armor is. Right? I was like, I know what it means to just follow him and be safe in his hands. And so that's where they're like, what the heck? Right? And so that's where I was able to do all these other things with them, because that's what I tell them. Like, I get visions from God, direction, all this other stuff. Right? In the moments he tells me what to do, he gives me the strength, all this stuff. Right? And so that's where we're saying, like, in this moment, that's what we're talking about. Like, if you really understand how good God's armor is, you can literally stand in the fire, be shot at, and just be cool as Winnie the Pooh. Right? But this is where we're talking about, like, so for the most part, right, that's what it looks like to do all that it takes to stand firm. Now, that's for physical battle. Now, for myself as a Christian, you know, I did very well for physical battle. I knew all what it was. I survived a lot, took all the challenges on. So, yes, I know physical battle very well, how to train for it. But I did not train enough for spiritual battle, right? I didn't think there was a greater challenge than that. And that's where Paul's writing and it really hits home, where it's like, dang, I've not put that same effort in preparing my whole life to fight these battles. And so this is where that last point right? Where he ended that, where it's like, having done all to stand firm. This is where every one of us has to then ask ourselves, am I doing all that I can to stand firm? Am I doing all that I can to win every battle that's in front of me? Am I doing all that I can to protect myself? How many people would say yes? Probably no one, right? I know I can't raise my hand for that. Can't say I'm doing all, right? So this is where it's kind of one of those things. It's like, wait a minute, if we know these battles are there, if we know this is the greatest fight of our life, why are we not giving our all? And so this is where those weapons will come in handy later, right? Or really why it comes down to God. But this is where you have to understand you are in the greatest fight of your life. Usually if you know that and if you believe that, you will live very differently, right? If you play sports and you're about to play one of the top teams, you know you're going to prepare that much harder before you play them, right? If you guys have the SATs coming up, right, you're going to prepare as hard as you can for that test, right? Your whole future depends on it. My bad, it's too early to bring it up, right? If you got job performances, right, job evaluations, things like that, right? Before your job evaluation, like, man, they've been really, firing a lot of people. I better make sure I do my best these last months or so to make sure I stay there and somebody else go, right? When you usually have that pressure, you respond in that situation. And this is where we have to say, like, why am I not preparing when I know this battle's there? Especially when you know what's happening inside you, right? So this is where I put on the handout. Who needs to prepare for battle? Someone who lets fear hold them back. Someone who does the things that they do not want to do. Someone who cannot be their true selves. Someone who is holding on tightly. Someone struggling to love. Someone who is their worst critic. Someone who has lost hope. Someone running from the truth. Someone who is struggling with faith. If you feel those things, then you're in a battle right now, right? If you're letting fear hold you back, there's battles inside you. You know that. I don't have to tell you that, right? If all these things that you're doing things that you don't want to do, that's showing you there's a struggle inside you. You're in a battle right now. If you're doing things that you want to do, obviously you're not in a battle. But if it's something that you don't want to do, that's the battle. I know for me, we did this retreat, right? What was it? Last 2 weeks ago, I think. But basically, when we were there, I stayed up 65 hours out of the 72 hours, right? This 3-day weekend. And so I was just partying it up, doing all this fun stuff, right? And so that's what I trained for, right? I'm trained to do all that high energy stuff. And so as we were doing this, we had all these groups together, things like that. We had a lot of good small groups. So when we were talking in the groups, some people were like, yeah, I struggle with fitting in. I struggle doing these things, right? They're talking about even struggling, like knowing what to do. What if I don't do this? What if I don't do that, right? How people will look at it if I don't achieve this or that, right? So there's all these struggles inside them, right? So I could understand, yeah, it's a struggle to be able to fit in, to be able to be like other people. And so I was asking them, how much percentage do they feel like they're like me, right? Like how much are we the same? So most of them, the numbers are pretty low. And then I asked them, like, how much do you think I fit in at this church, right? So the joke is I'm the only Mexican person that's ever joined HOC3, right? In the 43-something years, they're like, I'm probably the only Mexican member of the church. And so some people were like, maybe even all the HOCs, right? So I was like, maybe. Because maybe a Mexican person was a visitor, but did they ever become a member, right? So that's where I was like, I'm probably the only member of HOC. And so that's where I was like, so with knowing that, right, it's like, why did I come here, right? Or how does that, if everybody's not like me or everybody doesn't think I fit in, so I asked them, like, what percentage do you think that affects me, right? How much offense? And I was like, so as they were giving an answer, I was like, you know how much it affects me? 0%. The tiniest of zeros, right? I was like, that's how much I care whether I fit in or not. That's how much I care whether I'm like everybody else. And the reason why was because for the most part, I've worked with a lot of ethnic churches, right? I told you guys I work with almost every single group: Hispanic, Chinese, Mongolian, African American, Cambodian, right? All these different ones. I forget all the names. But basically, I work with all these churches, right? As I work with these churches that were all single culture, monoculture, nobody all fits in. Even amongst their own culture, they can't fit in completely. Not everybody can be themselves, right? Everybody's like, we're all the same. We go to the same school, have the same thing up there, but I can't be myself around this person or that person. I got to be different this way, right? If I ever said this, they won't, that's where it's always like, you're not black enough, you're not white enough, right? You're not Chinese enough, right? Have you guys heard that before? Right? I've been in groups like, what the heck? Like, what does that even mean? Right? So as I've seen that, like, people can't even fit in with themselves. That's why I know I can fit in anywhere. Because Jesus is the one that said, you fit in with me 100%. My foundation, my strength, what he confirmed, my establishment is Jesus. Like, everything about you is what we made you to be. You need to be who you are. Does that make sense? And so because I have that establishment and I've lived that life and I've built up this strength to have that armor of it don't matter what people think or what I look like other people, I know I'm who Jesus wants me to be, right? So I can literally go into any group. That's why I have the confidence to come here. I was like, yeah, I ain't going to be like none of them. But guess what? I can do something that none of them can do. Make a group that everybody fits in. Does that make sense? That's what I was like, if they can't do it with themselves, then guess what? Now I have my spot. I can do it, and I have this spot to help them fight the battle that's inside them. Does that make sense? And so that's where I said, that's why I was like, there's this understanding of like the battle's in front of you, the battles everybody's going around, how you submit that to God, right? And so for me, that's where God gives me a lot of strength in those battles, right? Based on my experience. But I'll talk about that a little bit later because I'm not completely invulnerable. So for us, what are we to do in this, how to fight this fight? And so it says, we are to stand firm because we are holding on to Jesus. This is the key principle that Paul will talk about in every single book. Every single thing when he talks about this warfare, everything he talks about this struggle, it's about standing firm with Christ. That's your armor. He's the person in front of you. He's the person that protects you. If you know Roman armor, they actually have these big shields, right? So basically the first person puts the shield down, bam. Then the person comes to the left, right, and they just keep building up, right? They build the wall. So as they have these shields, their heads are still vulnerable. And from arrows, they can come over. So they have a second row that comes behind them and puts them right over the top. And they just do the second row like that. So now because they're all together, they're not vulnerable. Does that make sense? And so that's why they just move forward. Boom, boom, boom. In perfect unison, perfect step. All moving forward with the protection front, back. And then they have their own archers that will create all that stuff. Does that make sense? But that's where when he's using this armor, it's like, don't you realize the first person is Jesus? Bam. He's got his shield up. He's got it ready. Come alongside him. Put your shield next to him. Right? That's where that's why all the believers, all this other stuff comes into play. All this stuff, this Holy Spirit where it protects you over. Like this is what he's trying to tell them. It starts with standing firm with Christ. And so this is where the second point. Firmness comes from our dependence on him. The words in this section were be strong in the Lord. Be strong in his might. Right? You can stand next to a person and you're like, that dude looks wimpy. Right? You're like, I don't know if I want to stand next to him. I don't know if I want this guy on my team. Does that make sense? You're like, that person's not strong enough. He don't have this. You don't want to stand with them. Right? Then you're going to try to fight by yourself. And so this is where he's saying, if you believe in Jesus' strength, his might, then you will be able to stand firm. His strength, his track record, his history is the reason why you'll be able to hold up. Right? Because that's what I said. Like for most of us, we will not be able to withstand everything. And so this dependence on Christ, this dependence on him, right? The unity. The next point is every soldier leans on each other. There is no one-man army. There's so many Christians I've met that they want to do it by themselves. I want to be strong. I want to be able to resist this. I want to be able to do that. They don't know what it means to be in a battle. They have no idea what war means. That's why I try not to laugh at them in their face, but inside I'm like, you think you could take on battles by yourself? You have no idea what it takes. Right? Even in that story that I shared, that one moment to be able to withstand all the bullets and be able to do what I needed to do, there's a team, a huge team that put me in that place to do it. The mechanics that keep those vehicles running. The people that put on all the armor, there's jobs for that. The people that do our radios, communications, that we can make sure we're in the proper alignment, all the different places. Right? The people that gave us our armor, supply all that issues. People that give us the ammo. All the people that calibrate our weapons, things like that. Does that make sense? Even we have artillery, tanks, all that stuff to create enough protection to where the enemy can only go in small numbers at us. Right? We have planes, helicopters, all this kind of air support that we can take out people whenever we need to. Does that make sense? And I had hundreds of trainers that the Army continued to put me through all this type of training to be able to handle that one moment. Right? So it wasn't I did not do it by myself. I did it because of thousands and thousands of soldiers that were standing alongside me. Does that make sense? And so that's where all the soldiers understand that. We do not fight by ourselves. We appreciate every single job for what it's worth. I used to tell people I used to jump out of planes, right? Well, I jumped out of planes. So when the people that pack our parachutes, every time we see them in restaurants or bars, we always buy them a beer. Right? We're like, thank you. Like I landed safely, right? Like, because we don't have time to pack all that chutes. We're training to jump into countries, take over the stuff. We can't do all that stuff. Does that make sense? So our lives are literally in the hands of other people. That's ingrained in us. I've told you guys I've been on the Navy SEAL compounds. You know, they used to escort me to do all that stuff. I did stuff for Special Forces. All the top elite soldiers, for all the military, their way of working is all about teamwork. Every single one has a special job, and every single one of them depends on them to do that job the best. Does that make sense? But none of them trained to do it by themselves. It is all about how good of a teammate you are, right? If you could be the most skilled soldier out there, the greatest killer, and you'll never make it on those teams if you're selfish, because they won't depend on you. They'll vote you out, right? Then if you ever read about their training, how they put selection, all that stuff, they'll literally tell you, if you want to fight by yourself, you ain't going to be on this top team, because that's not how you do it. You will never accomplish anything by yourself. You'll never win the battle against who we're going against, because we're going against the greatest enemies that we'll ever face. Does that make sense? And that's where it's kind of like every person that's ever fought battle knows you cannot do it by yourself. Nobody can stay up 24/7 to stay on guard. Nobody can watch 360 degrees all the time. Nobody can wear armor every single day, right? That's what we're talking about. That's why you understand why we have teamwork, why we have teammates, all this other stuff. When I need a rest, I have a bunch of people that go out in front of me. They put up the new wall, and I can take all my stuff off. Does that make sense? Like we work in that unit. As soon as I get my rest, then I do the same for them, and we just cycle, over and over. And that's why we have the confidence to do what we do, because when you fight one of us, you're fighting thousands of us. And that's where like nobody has that kind of backup. Does that make sense? So Christians, you got to understand that same principle, right? We're not supposed to do it alone. That's why Paul, especially in Ephesians, stressed so much about how you treat other believers, how you lean on each other, how you share stuff. That's what will truly make you strong and stand firm, because all of you are standing with Jesus together, right? And so obviously this is not just for military, right? This is life. So I was talking about the retreat where, you know, I stayed up and did all this other stuff, right? I'm trained to just be high energy for fun, for games, well, not just for fun, but for games and like mental stuff, right? But I'm not good at computers and other stuff, right? So if I stay up, I cannot do computer stuff, right? Like my mind does not work that way. So after these 65 hours, I was supposed to come back here and train a bunch of youth for this VBS camp that they were doing, right? And so my mind, I'm so tired. I'm like, what the heck? Like I made bad decisions in my life right now, but I'm regret. So as I come here, I'm trying to do it. There's all these issues that we couldn't figure out, right? So as I'm struggling, I was like, Melody, right? Melody was at this camp. I was like, Melody, like you know some of the AV stuff, you know you can help me, right? So her parents drove her back, her mom drove her back, so she got an 1.5 hour nap, right? I had no nap. I was going straight. And so I was like, hey, you got a little bit of rest. Maybe you can help. So as we're doing this trying to figure out this AV stuff, right? Neither one of us minds are working enough. And so I'm like, so she was like, I should call Lolly. And I was like, nah, I don't think we need Lolly, right? And so I was like, we can probably figure out. She's like, no, I'm calling Lolly, right? So she calls her right away, right? And then her and Jacob, they're able to help us. They're able to guide us through this stuff, right? They stayed up the same amount of times as us, and all of a sudden, but somehow their minds worked, right? And the reason why is because they do all that stuff all the time. Right? They're well trained for it. They've done it over and over. They've gone through all the scenarios, right? All that practice. And so they were able to guide us from where they were at their family event. Does that make sense? They were able to give us all that direction. And so that's why I said, like, even just to do little ministry things, I was like, yeah, she knew who could help her. She leaned on Lolly and got the help. Does that make sense? And so a couple of days later, right, on Thursday, that was on Sunday night. So Thursday, every morning I'd been here at 9 a.m., right, to help them run the AV stuff. I didn't need to be, I wanted to help them. And so they're doing like the dance and worship stuff, things like that. So I just happened to be a couple minutes late on Thursday morning because the coffee people were late and I needed that wake up espresso, right? And so as I'm coming, I show up like 9:04, they're on the phone with Lolly. Like, oh, she's trying to help. I was like, what the heck? Like, what? And so as we're trying to figure out this problem, right, there's all these issues, all these things going on. So we were only able to come up with a temporary solution, right? And so after everybody left, I was able to fix everything, right? I reset everything, got it done, and so now our things are good. And so I was asking her, like, why'd you call Lolly, right? Like, technically, you know, she might have been sleeping, right? All this other stuff, like, you know, why would you call her that early? And so I was like, you know, I'm here every morning at 9 a.m. I'm always here to help. Why would you not wait a couple minutes or at least call me knowing that I'm on my way here to help, right? Why didn't she call me? I was like, why'd you call Lolly over me? And her response was, if you're in danger and need saving, would you call Batman when you have Superman's number? Right? I was like, dang! I was like, where did this come from? I was like, was trash talking part of AV training? I was like, what the heck is going on? Right? But that's where it made sense, though. It's true. If you're in danger, who would you call? The person that's the best, right? The person that will help you the most. So that's what we're saying. Like in every life, and this is that mindset. Whatever you're going through, whatever challenge, you don't have to do it alone. Lean on the people that are around you. Does that make sense? That's how it makes life easier. And that's where ultimately why Jesus is the number one call. Right, Melody? If you call Jesus ahead of me, I'd be okay with that. But I ended up fixing it. That's what no apology. All right. But that's what we're saying. Hopefully you understand this, right? This whole leaning on people. So you cannot do this alone. This is not just soldier's principle. This is not just our everyday life. The Bible characters also show this same type of mindset, right? Moses did not do things by himself. When he first gets called by God, he has his father-in-law Jethro to help guide him, help him understand some of this stuff, right? When he's going to go to Egypt, God sends Aaron with him because Moses don't feel confident by himself. When Moses is leading his people out of Egypt, they're getting attacked. Moses does not fight on the battlefield. Joshua is his general. Moses is the one on the top praying, doing other stuff, talking to God to get these directions. Joshua was the one helping him. There's a story where Moses is supposed to be praying in his arms. You know, if his arms are up, he's supposed to be like asking God for strength. So if his arms are up, they'll win, right? And so every time his arms got tired and dropped, Israel started losing. So as he got no more physical strength. Two of the people come and hold up his arms, and they win the victory, right? The story's in there, like, don't do it by yourself. David did not do things by himself. We see him defeat Goliath by himself, take on a giant, but that was just to show his faith. And then the rest of his life, he has other people helping him, right? When he's on the run, Saul, he's got Jonathan to help him, guide him, direct him, avoid this, avoid that. When David becomes the general himself, he ends up having these mighty men, all these different people that come, right? They fight alongside him. David is not a one-man army slaying all these Philistines. He's got some of the best people, and there's a reason why they become the best based on how he followed that godlike character, right? How he had God's armor. That's a bigger one. Paul, same thing, right? Paul, when he gets blinded, somebody comes to heal him. When Paul's first doing ministry, nobody believes him. Nobody wants to support him. Nobody wants to even put him out there. The man named Barnabas goes alongside him and says, I'll walk with him. I'll be with him. I'll give all my reputation and walk alongside this guy to fight. Does that make sense? And that's how Paul gets his start and actually does all the things that he does. Paul never did it by himself, and throughout his life he says that. But this is where it's important to understand. Even Jesus leaned on people. When you look at his life, he's constantly seeking God, right? But even throughout, he leans on the 12. He's got his special 3, right? When he has to go to the Garden of Gethsemane, he asks him, stay up with me, help me, I need strength. He has Mary, Martha, Lazarus, that family. They actually provide him a lot of support. They're actually one of the major financial contributors that support Jesus' ministry, right? There's all these things that they did to help Jesus. And if you know, when Jesus goes to the wilderness, when he's tempted for 40 days, right, it says he's so weak. There's a detail that's in the Bible that tells us a very important fact. When Jesus has no strength left after the 40 days, it tells you the angels came alongside and gave him back his strength. Right? Jesus didn't just magically give himself his strength back. The angels came and gave him the strength after going through that battle that he just went through. That's why when you see Jesus, he talks about that, right? Like, I can call down thousands of angels, all this other stuff to stand alongside me. He knows he's not alone. He's got God. He's got all this support. Does that make sense? He's trying to build up this army to be able to continue that fight, that mission. And so that's why I said, hopefully you guys understand this, right? You cannot do it alone. And so I'll end it real quick. Just for myself, right? I know how to fight. I told you I know how to fight physical, but even the spiritual battles, that's where I'm learning myself. This sermon hits home very well. Where even for myself, right, this is what I'm working on the most. This is what I'm praying about the most. And I'm thankful God gave me this opportunity to speak on it because I can be honest with you of what I go through. So when I talk about these thoughts through your heart and mind, right, I put my own on there. You can obviously think about your own on your own time, but this is my own battles inside me, right? These are the thoughts that I have. If you give it all up to God, you won't get back what you really want/need, right? The first start of really having the armor is you have to give up everything and be able to train from scratch, right? Build the foundations that's solid enough to withstand what battle you're going through. There's that hesitance. Even though God has done so much for me, I'm still hesitant to give up everything again to start over to be able to put on this new armor that I need for spiritual battle, right? So there's always that personal thing, like what if he doesn't give this back or that back, right? What would people think of you if you were your a little bit? I'm trying to get better at giving everything, right? And part of it is the next point. What if they knew your darkest secrets or thoughts, right? What if I have dark thoughts every couple months? Does that override the couple months of good that I've done or all this other stuff? Right? Or if you knew all the bad stuff or the things I wanted to do, how would you think? What would you think about me? Could I ever really be honest enough? And that's where obviously Jesus is the one that comes with that, right? Who are you without your work? What you do for people? I've served people for 10 years in the army, 10 years in ministry now, right? So that's where it's like, what am I supposed to do? Who am I without work? Or who am I if I'm not serving people? What if God asked me to do something or step away or do different things that doesn't involve that, right? Who's my real identity? Would people really sacrifice to help you in your times of need? So this is where I said, like, I need help. There's certain areas I'm trying to work on in my life. What if I need to step back or step down or need somebody else to help cover? Will people ever sacrifice to do that? Right? There's all these fears inside you or inside myself. Would people cast you aside because you want the wrong things? So I'm not talking about wanting simple things, but there's something I want where it's like, oh, it's not sinful, it's not immoral, it's not illegal, But that's in my opinion, right? Some people are like, oh, that's not right, or this and that. And so how would people really respond if I shared my truest desires? The next one is God's strength enough to get all the things he wants me to do like he wanted me, like he did in the past. Right? That's why I said I have a lot of stories where God gave me all this strength to do all this stuff. I'm not that same person, or I don't have that same conviction, or I don't have that same, I don't believe I have it, right? And so that's where I'm like, can God really do everything? Can I really go take on the challenges like I did in that story or in the other stories that I have, right? And so that's where God's obviously having to work and protect that mind. What if you lose a relationship if you speak the truth? And then the last one, if I sacrifice all, will it even make a dent or be for nothing? Right? So this is where I said, like, that's the battles that I have inside. That's where Jesus is trying to then help me overcome those. Does that make sense? So I won't act like I have it figured out. This is where I said, every one of us has these greatest battles. And so everything I've learned from the Army, I'm trying to then apply it now, and I'm trying to apply it for a better battle and a stronger battle. Because even for me as a soldier, 95% of the time I withstood every battle and did very well, very well. But even I knew I never had that last final 5% to be perfect in everything. Does that make sense? And so that's where I'm like, because I didn't, I suffered losses, or people got hurt, and that's why I went to God. God, how can I have 100%? I know how serious battle is. I need 100 to protect everything. And I was like, how can we get there? And that's where he literally said, you ain't gonna get it in the Army, you're gonna get it here. And you're gonna get it with me. We're gonna start over. You ready? Does that make sense? And so he's had to help me get through that process to be like, I want that 100%. And so hopefully for you ask yourself, hopefully you want that for yourselves. Does that make sense? I know I want it for all the youth, all the people I serve. I want them to have 100% armor. But if you don't want it for yourself, it's going to be hard. Or you're going to lose battles that you don't want to lose. All right, so the application, spend some time thinking about how much you fear versus how much you trust God. Rate yourself out of 100 to see where you currently are. List out all the areas of fear that are keeping that percentage down. The next one, pray to Jesus to help you conquer the fear in those areas so you can trust him more. This is not about you figuring out how to fight and how to be stronger. It is figuring out how to get closer to Christ to be able to have him help you overcome all these things. And that's what next week will be about. When you're afraid, read a character of the Bible who God helped overcome their fears. Ask God to help you in that same strength and courage. Share with a fellow believer who can provide strength. Right? That's what we're saying. If you're struggling, if you're in a battle, do not fight alone. Right? Go to God and go to others. And the last one, make a plan to make more time to prepare yourself to wear God's armor so you can stand firm in the Lord. God's armor is good for 6 days. It'll protect you nonstop for 6 days. But it's flawed. It can't protect you 7 straight days. And there's a reason why. When you wear armor, every time it gets hit, it becomes more and more vulnerable. Right? We have body armor. 3 rounds, it's useless. And depending on the caliber you're hit with, the size of the bullet, some of them will have greater damage and some can go right through. Does that make sense? But no matter what, any type of armor that you wear, the more it's hit, it becomes vulnerable, becomes weak. It's not strong. And so you need to remold it. You need to fix it, add stuff to it, or replace it. Does that make sense? That's what God literally tells you. 6 days your armor will last and it'll protect you. But that's why you take it off with me and I protect you on that 7th day. I restore you. I restore the armor. I give you all the things that you need with my presence, with my direction, my love. And then I can give you that armor to go the next 6 days. Does that make sense? And because that's why I say he understands that. You need a rest. You need a break. And he's like, I will literally be there with you to help you wear it for the next 6 days. And just repeat, 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 repeat. All right, and so that's why I said, God, you're not alone in the battle. God's got you. He's got the greatest plan. Trust me, nobody can fight that many days in a row. I did not fight that many days in a row. All right, it's impossible. I've never seen a soldier that can. And I've served with the best. All right, and so hopefully you understand that. God, and he literally gave me the best plan. Make sure you come to me, and that's where you got to make the time. That's your first start to your battle plan. Will I make time to seek out God to be ready for what's coming? All right, so please join me as we close in prayer. Father God, we just thank you again